Welcome to the Kings Beat podcast. I am James Ham, Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. Joining me, Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast. Brenden, how are you?
I'm doing good, James. It was fun being in Golden One Center the last two games, even if they weren't two wins. They were still close and entertaining games. So I'm doing good. What about yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. I'll tell you, the back-to-back wiped me out. I was pretty beat up after the back-to-back. Like I had Brendan knows this, but we had a snow day up here. I had to go help my father-in-law out. He basically hasn't had power for a week, and we had to go shop and then bring a generator to him and gas and propane and drive in the snow. So yesterday and shovel snow. Yesterday was a bit reckless, and then having to go cover a game until late. That one wiped me out, man. It wiped me out, and I kind of feel like the Kings are a little wiped out. That's what they look like. They look dog tired, man. And how I kind of judge them is like whether they're tired or not is I see the stupid fouls. That's where they're not moving their feet. They're not quick to the punch. They're getting touch fouls left and right in both the games on Friday and Saturday. And I think it is sort of an indicator of exhaustion that this team is facing right now. I don't know. Am I crazy?
No, I mean, I think that obviously they practice a lot. That's been a theme with this team. And I actually think that that's helped them. But there are moments we've seen throughout the course of this year where they really do look exhausted. And there's some of these back-to-backs. I think of one earlier in the year when they were on a road trip. I think it was second night of a back-to-back in Atlanta. They looked totally gassed. And you kind of saw that in that Minnesota game. But I will say it doesn't feel like the most valid excuse when the Minnesota played a back-to-back as well. And, probably could have had their own level of exhaustion. But when you're a team that's not very good defensively and have to lock in on those little things, that exhaustion can probably hurt you a little more than some of these other teams.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's get to some of the business. First up, Sean had something going on today, so he's not going to join us. There could be some random way that he shows up. Well, probably not even that. Sean won't be here today, but he'll be here this week. Let's see, outside of that, make sure that if you're watching here on the live stream, give us a thumbs up. Don't, since Sean's not here to confuse you, we won't talk about like hitting it twice or anything like that. Just give us a thumbs up. And if you're new to the Kings Beat, subscribe here to the Kings Beat on YouTube. But also go to thekingsbeat.com, become a subscriber, become a premium subscriber, and get invitations to things like the happy hours, but also access to all of the writing and all of the other things we do at the Kings Beat. And look, you're supporting local journalism and people who have covered the Kings for many years and put out good content. Let's see. Jim Garfunkel in the chat says he got his Kings Beat swag and stickers. Yep, I sent that out. So you can also jump on board with Kings Beat apparel, which is cool. Brendan, we haven't been in this situation for a long time in Sacramento, but watching, here we are on a Sunday afternoon, and every single game that's on TV matters to the Kings. Are you feeling that? It's something that I know that they don't kind of want to acknowledge, but here we are. I've got the Lakers and Warriors game on. We just saw the Mavs and the Suns, and then every single time you see a game come to a conclusion, you're looking and how does that impact the Kings? And for the Suns, they just moved within 2 games of the Kings, but they're only 3 games back in the loss column. Dallas, on the other hand, they're now 6 games back in the loss column, and they're running out of time to catch up to the Kings. They're at 65 games, so they only have 17 games left on their schedule. The Kings would have to have a catastrophic collapse in order for a team like Dallas to catch up. And I'm doing this with every single game I'm watching. You're looking at the Lakers and Warriors, who are you pulling for? Okay, go ahead and win, Lakers. That would help the Kings because that means that the the Golden State Warriors win streak would be snapped and they would move a few games behind the Kings as well. Just where are you at with how you're sort of tracking and watching the standings at this point in the season?
First of all, I'm disappointed that you really just said on this Kings podcast that you want the Lakers to win a game of basketball ever. Little
Oh
disappointed,
yeah,
Jake.
yeah. No, I mean, I'm just looking purely at the standings, and I would rather the Kings host a first round matchup and to lock into a top four, draft spot. I think it's really interesting that the Kings aren't that far away from already being in that conversation of like locking in a home court first round playoff series.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely get where you're coming from, just giving you a little bit of a hard time. But I think that that's also been my focus recently. I feel pretty confident about top six at this point, and I'm really even feeling pretty good about top four, although it's a little early to call that. And kind of transitioned more into thinking about some of these matchups because that's becoming more and more of a reality at this point, that's going to be a thing that the Kings have to think about here. And as we touched on last episode, I'm not exactly sure what the good matchups would be for this Kings team, but it's intriguing to watch at this point, and it makes for entertainment even outside of just games that Sacramento is directly involved in. But it's going to be intriguing, man, because at the same time, a lot of these Kings games, I feel like I'm walking away with the same sort of takeaways. So I have bigger takeaways from watching these other teams, I feel like, rather than, oh, well, the Kings are great at defense and they're still horrible or great at
Great at
offense and still
offense.
horrible at defense.
Yeah, I mean that's become like the theme of the week, right? I don't think it's without. It's been the issue all season long that the Kings' defense isn't great, but their regression on the defensive end over the last even the last two games. Like we can start with the Clippers, we can start with the game we saw last night where they lost to the Timberwolves. It doesn't really matter. The offense has been what's winning games. Right now, I looked this morning, their offensive rating is crazy. Their offensive rating is up to what is it? 118.5. So they are 118.5. They're the highest offensive rated team of all time in the NBA as of right now. But their defensive rating just keeps sinking, man. They're at a 116. So their net rating has stayed right around the same 2.4, 2.5, 2.6. Their offense keeps getting better. Their defense just keeps getting worse. And at this point, they're 26th in offensive rating and they're tumbling. And we're seeing, even in a game like Minnesota, I guess we can start here with they lose, I don't even know the final, what is it, 136, 134 to Minnesota on Saturday night. And in that game, Mike Brown, like, first of all, he turned to PJ Dozier because things were going well. Keegan Murray was having one of his worst games of his career. So he turned to PJ Dozier. That didn't work. He turned to Alex Len for a few seconds. That was crazy. He turned to Kessler Edwards. And then you watch Kessler Edwards become such a force defensively. And I kept thinking to myself, is Kessler Edwards good at defense? Or is everyone else just so bad on the Kings roster that he stands out? Like, hey, what are you doing, man? You're making us look bad. Like, why are you playing defense like that? I mean, did you get that same feel? Like Kessler Edwards was just like, holy cow, he was good.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a combination of both. And it felt very KZ Okpala to me, except I think that Kessler Edwards has a little bit more, just can kind of fit in on offense a little bit more than where I felt like KZ was a liability on that end of the floor. But nobody could stop Anthony Edwards in that game. And it wasn't like that Clippers game where it was just tough shot making, that 170 plus game from both sides. Talked to a couple people since, and most people seem to think like it wasn't bad defense, despite it being 175, 176, I think was the final. It was just crazy shot making.
Oh yeah,
Yesterday's
that
game
was great
against,
offense. It was great
yes.
offense. Yeah.
Yesterday's game against Minnesota, though, specifically Sacramento's side, was just really bad defense. It felt like it was layups for Anthony Edwards. There were so many times where Sabonis is forced to help in a pick and roll, and then the Sacramento player on the weak side isn't coming in and helping the helper there. It's something that Mike Brown pointed out, specifically calling out Kevin Huerter and Malik Monk for combining for 1 rebound in that game. So that was, it wasn't an aspect of Minnesota playing great offense and making tough shots. It was definitely more so Sacramento giving them whatever they wanted, but Kessler Edwards ended up being the best option. I actually didn't think PJ Dozier was horrible. He didn't
Yeah.
stand out the same way that Kessler Edwards did. I see why Mike went in a different direction, but it was encouraging to see that from Kessler Edwards. I'm not convinced that he like needs to be in the rotation necessarily, but I think we could see sort of KZ Okpala type minutes that we saw from him earlier in the year.
I think we might, like, first of all, Mike Brown was very honest and said that he did not intend, like, that wasn't something that was planned. That, like, the Kessler Edwards thing just happened. And then Kessler Edwards did enough to stay on the court. Um, Anthony Edwards had 22 points in the mid third quarter. He sat at 22 points until the last like minute and a half of the game when I think he got a couple of free throws and then he had one finish. Outside of that, I thought Kessler Edwards completely took him out of the game. It was stunning to me that we were watching a guy who hasn't played hardly at all run a plus 12 in 14 minutes of action. And I don't believe in plus minus as like this end all be all stat, but there are certain times where the plus minus matches the eye test. And I thought that is exactly what we saw from Kessler Edwards. He's long, he's athletic. Mike Brown even said something, which I think it wasn't like it was kind of a finger pointing at the style of player that KZ Okpala is, but I don't think it was like a shot at KZ Okpala. But he said that he can take a hit and square you up and stay in front of you. And that's not something that they have a lot of. You know, he's a 6'8", 6'9" guy with a 7 foot plus wingspan, but he's also strong. And I thought, like his 3-point shot was nice. His rebounding, I thought was really good. He had no idea what to do once he got a rebound. That was kind of like, holy cow, you haven't played with these guys at all. But overall, I was slightly excited to see if this is a guy who could actually play, 10, 12 minutes a game down the stretch here as the Kings try to limit, offensive guards, like guards and small forwards that have size.
And this is the exact type of game, or that was the exact type of game where you need somebody like Kessler Edwards. I mean, ideally a little bit more proven and better, but Anthony Edwards is, in my mind, the type of offensive player that the Kings don't really have a great answer for. The first 2 times these teams matched up, it was Harrison Barnes that was assigned to him, and we saw that again at the beginning of the game yesterday. And that didn't go great. Obviously, Anthony Edwards was really rolling, as you pointed out early there, but there's a lot of big wings in this league, and I think that Anthony Edwards kind of fits that, specifically in the Western Conference. It's something that Mike Brown has pointed out. I mean, every night, especially when you get into the postseason, you're going to play one of these type of guys. And maybe the Kings have some okay guard defenders like Davion Mitchell, obviously, De'Aaron Fox, I think, when he locks in, but Harrison Barnes and Keegan Murray are kind of up and down on the defensive end. And if they're not on, who are you putting on Anthony Edwards? Who are you putting on Kevin Durant, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard? Like you could go up and down the Western Conference, and there's always seemingly one of these wings or larger guard
Luka.
players, a Luka, yeah,
Yeah.
that the Kings are going to need to find a way to stop. And as of last night, it feels like maybe Kessler Edwards is a direction you're going to need to look towards when you're playing those type of players.
Yeah, it's funny because Mike Brown has brought this up when we talk about PJ Dozier. He always brings up that PJ Dozier has he has playoff experience. And my first thought is, well, why would PJ Dozier possibly play in the playoffs? And it's like, well, because you can't stop certain guys. Like everyone knows that. This team cannot stop certain players, certain player types. And I'll even say that I think Kessler Edwards, like whether he's on the roster next season or the season after that, what we're looking at is a player archetype that the Kings need. It's what we talked about going into the trade deadline. This team needs a long, athletic wing defender, and KZ Okpala, unfortunately for him, he wasn't good enough, and he wasn't good enough to earn minutes, and it is what it is. Like if you can't play more than 3 or 4 minutes, and Mike Brown doesn't want to give you more than that. Whether he's good enough to play more than that or not, it's not for us to decide. It's for Mike Brown to decide. He's the guy who has coaching experience. He's the guy that knows, whether that guy fits what he's trying to do or not. And at the end of the day, you could see that they kind of lost faith in KZ as sort of an option. I don't think as a player, like they still wanted to develop him as a 23-year-old, but he started having knee problems and then needed knee surgery. And they're just like, okay, we got to pull the plug. But even before that, they had sent him to the G League. They had started to go away from him as an option at all. And now we're seeing just a different type of player, but like it's an archetype. The Kings have to have this moving forward. They have to have a 6'8", 6 foot. To be honest, they need like three of them. That's the way the NBA is now. Like when you're going up against a team like Minnesota, or you're going up against a team like the Clippers, like back to back, these two back to back games, it just shines like a giant bright light on the thing that you've been missing this entire season, and the thing that the Kings did not address and will have to address this offseason. And I think, like we'll have more conversations here about the way that this roster is going to be constructed moving forward. But everyone loves Keegan Murray and sees the potential, and you see where he can be. Everyone loves Harrison Barnes and the potential of what he can be. Even Trey Lyles, people have like, he's played so far above his contract at this point that you would love to see him back. And then we got Sasha Vezenkov. Okay, not one of those guys is 6'8", 6'9", with a 7'3" wingspan that can defend like multiple positions or can block a shot. So what are you going to do? Like, how do you bring all those guys back and think that you're going to be better and prove that you can be better? And so I think that it's definitely an interesting point of the roster construction that the Kings are going to face moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to me that I can sit and say like I'm a little envious of the Brooklyn Nets at this point because they have like 8 of those guys somehow. They don't exactly
Yeah,
have
or the
any other
Raptors.
creators, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think ideally long term that Keegan Murray can develop a bit more on the defensive end. I think as he gets more accustomed in the NBA, like he's the one they're putting on Paul George, and I thought that he had some okay moments in that Clippers game, but I was really surprised by yesterday's game with Keegan. Usually when he has off nights, I don't feel like he's actively hurting you when he's out there. But last night was probably the worst showing we've seen from Keegan, unless there's another game slipping my mind. But he played less than 20 minutes, which that in itself is very telling. And I thought that also he was a part of that shortcoming when it came to helping the helper and securing rebounds and just weak side rim protection. He had 3 boards himself in those 20 minutes, 0 points. But were you surprised by just the performance of Keegan Murray yesterday?
I'm gonna say, yeah. Am I surprised that it was that bad? Sure. Like, do you expect somebody to have that kind of poor showing? But he's a rookie, and rookies have these games. It is what it is. Like, you're relying on a rookie to play. What is he at now? I haven't even looked. Is he at 28 minutes a game on the season? Whatever it is. I mean, he's playing a ton of minutes on the 3rd seed in the Western Conference as a rookie. And so, yeah, you're going to have to deal with the times where he has he's at 29.7 minutes on the season where it's just not going to work out. And I think the fact that he's still shooting 41.3% from 3, you would like his rebounding numbers to be higher, but they have improved. He's up to 4.6 a game. He's a little under 12 points a game. You like to see that. But I think what we're seeing is over the course of the last couple of weeks, him expanding his game and showing more and more and more. But he just entered like his 3rd NBA season, his 3rd college season in his rookie season. So like this is one of the guys that there are going to be nights where he's great, and there are going to be other nights where he just doesn't have it. And the Kings need to have options for that, which I think is good. Why Kessler stepped up. And they're going to continue to need that. Somebody's going to have to step up. And like you bring up Keegan, for every much that we can like bang on Keegan for that game, I'll tell you that Malik Monk over the last 3 or 4 games, he's been bad. Flat out. Like he put up 45 and then 15 and then like 8, and then 6, and then 4, and it keeps going down. And like his shooting numbers are shooting 10% from three over his last 3 games, shooting 26%, like something like that from the field. Like, this is that moment where the Kings are being tested. They won the 5 straight, and that hid, I think, a lot of the problems that were starting to show up. Whether it's like the inconsistency of specific players, or it's the inconsistency on the defensive end, the defensive numbers tracking downwards so greatly, it gets hidden because you've won 5 straight. But now it's like, okay, they lost one, so we can go back and sort of digest what we saw and sort of piece it together.
For sure. And in the Keegan game yesterday, it doesn't bring up any new concerns for me with Keegan long term or anything,
No.
just more so specifically pointing out that I thought that he didn't have a great showing in that one. Like I said, he was solid in the game prior. For Malik, I think that the playmaking has still been there, and he hasn't been too turnover prone. I thought, like in that Clippers game specifically, they went to him actually in place of Keegan at the end because the Clippers were just doubling De'Aaron Fox as soon as he crossed half court. So you needed a little bit more secondary playmaking, and they went to Malik there. But the shot's not falling, and he's obviously not an impact player on the defensive end. He's actually a negative on that end more often than not. Both him and Huerter are kind of guys that the other team would look at and just be hunting. But you need more from some of these surrounding pieces if you're going to pull out games against these other teams that you're really competing with in the playoff race in the Western Conference. And I think it's a good example that we've seen recently of playing this Clippers team, Minnesota. You're going to see New Orleans tomorrow, where these are potential first round matchups. And I think it is letting us learn a lot about this team and get a little sneak peek of what some of the shortcomings could be come playoff time.
Yeah, yeah, totally. You know what? Meg had a comment here in our chat. Here it is. They are prioritizing the paint over perimeter and rim anyway, I think. Brennan, that's something that, I mean, they are prioritizing protecting the paint, and I think more specifically protecting Domantas Sabonis. Like that's I think that's what people forget. It's not just team scoring at the rim. It's Demonis picking up fouls. And we're once again in that cycle where he's in foul trouble almost every single night. And that's almost like the first sign that the defense is failing. Like it's the first red flag. Hey, the defense is struggling. Like, how do we know? Well, because Sabonis has fouled out in 3 of the last 7 games or something. And he's got 5 fouls in a couple of games. And that's sort of, to me, it's like the flashing red light saying, we got a problem starting. And this team does have this, their identity is to keep people out of the middle, to keep them off of Sabonis so he stops picking up fouls. And they're not doing it. That's the problem. That's why we're seeing the defensive rating skyrocket. And, eventually we'll see the offensive rating go down, because when Sabonis steps off the court, you're not nearly as good on the offensive end. So, like that, Meg, you bring that up, and I mean, sure, the Kings have given up a ton of 3-point shots, right? Some of those are just good shots. Some of those are like because the Kings are trying to protect the paint, though. And I think that that's what they've been. There will come a point where they have better defensive players, or they understand the scheme better, and they're able to have that more like balance out a little bit more. But Brendan, you're a guy who watches the tape all the time. What are you seeing that's causing some of this?
Yeah, I think what you pointed out there, one of their defensive staples being no middle, I think is important for people to keep in mind. Like when they see players seemingly getting blown by on the perimeter, a lot of times it's, well, they were just making sure they don't get to the middle, and then you're funneling into Sabonis. And this is why it's always talked about specifically in this sort of defensive scheme. The defense is a 5-man unit. It's on everyone. And I really think that when Sabonis is getting engaged, that player that is on the weak side needs to come in and help the helper there. And if that's Malik Monk or Kevin Huerter, to be honest, they kind of struggle in that aspect. And I think the Minnesota is a decent example of, asked Mike Brown a little bit about kind of their physicality on defense in pregame. And he pointed out how they're allowed to have that ridiculous ball pressure because they have a rim protector behind them in Rudy Gobert. And Sacramento doesn't really have that. So I think that while ball pressure is another one of their 5 defensive staples, that if you don't have that typical rim protection, you are forced to just kind of play on a string defensively, and everybody needs to be tight on their rotations. And if one person has a shortcoming, everything could totally collapse. And it's not one person every single possession, but it just takes one each time. And even if it's alternating, that leads to poor defensive possessions. And I think the real concerning thing for me in these last 2 games, and again, I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, they won 5 of their last 6. Like,
Yep.
I think Mike Brown unintentionally already kind of laid out the excuses for this loss in pregame, or maybe it was postgame in that Lakers one, where he got asked, I think it was a second OKC game, he wanted them to be greedy, that they could have had plenty of excuses that people would write off why they would have been totally fine losing that game. And he felt the same way going into the Minnesota game, but he wanted to be greedy and come out and get a win. But, you know, reality is second night of a back-to-back, you just won your last 5 games coming out of the All-Star break. So they'd been playing well. So I don't want to sound like a super Debbie Downer here or anything, but it's just the same defensive shortcomings, because in these 6 games post All-Star break, they're 129 in offensive rating, which is top of the league in that time. And 129 is ridiculous, but their defensive rating is sitting at 123, which is only ahead of the Portland Trailblazers and the Houston Rockets in that stretch. So I really do think that significantly needs to be cleaned up. And there's nights where you can just get away with it offensively, but I had come into these games really thinking that, or I specifically had a focus on their fourth quarter defense. I think coming into that Clippers game, they were 7th or 8th in fourth quarter defense, even though they were 25th on the year. And you didn't even see that in these ones. You know, they weren't necessarily locking up when they needed to. Even if you look at that Clippers game, they were forced to go to so much zone because they had no answer for Russell Westbrook. So I think that these sort of games where you see Mike Brown searching, just bring up a little bit of concerns. But they are playing well recently, and I don't want last night's loss to kind of overshadow that.
Yeah, and I'll also say, like, I didn't feel like Mike Brown was searching on Friday night, but on the second night of a back-to-back, whether Minnesota, like, we always get this whole thing, well, Minnesota is playing on the second night of a back-to-back as well. First of all, the Kings never play, like, when their opponent is on the second night of a back-to-back, they lose almost every single time. The Kings do. I don't know what the problem is, but they can't beat teams when they're on the second night of a back-to-back. I'd have to look it up what the record is on the season, but I think it's like 1-6 or something. It's not good. So that's one thing. But I'll also point out that the Kings are always concerned about themselves, not about their opponent. That's like their goals are to get better as a team and to focus on themselves and to completely, to work through some of these things. And so that's when I look at a game like the back-to-back on Friday and Saturday, and Mike is searching in the first game. In the second game, in the first game, he's not searching. In the second game, he's searching because, like, they've run out of gas. Fox wasn't nearly as impactful as a player as he has been for the last, I don't know, 6 weeks. He's just been incredible. And then they had other guys who were failing to step up. Even, I'll bring up Kevin Huerter. Huerter goes for 29 points. Ridiculous, right? He looked like, and we saw it on Friday night too. That's when we started to see, like, maybe for the first time this season, or at least the first time since like the first month of the season, we saw the whole cave on thing, where all of a sudden he's like, he skips straight to plaid, and he's hitting that's a reference, Brendan, so just so you know, to Spaceballs, Spaceballs the movie. Anyway, he just starts hitting everything in the second quarter, and he looks like this incredible, like, lightning bolt, and you're like, what in the world is happening? And then we get to Saturday, and historically, Kevin Huerter has been absolutely horrible on the second night of back-to-backs this season. It's not good at all. His shooting numbers, everything are so far down. I even have his splits right here. On the second night of a back-to-back, on 0 days rest, Huerter on the season, well, right now he's shooting 37. He had a good night, but typically this season he's not been good on the second night of a back-to-back. He was spectacular, but Mike Brown brought up something in postgame, which I think needs to be added to as well. Like, Kevin Herter didn't rebound, and neither did a couple of his teammates. And you can't just walk into a game and think that you're just going to score. So 29 points, 2 assists, 0 rebounds for Kevin Herter. The night before, 18 points, 0 assists, 0 rebounds. So in the last 2 games, he's failed to register a rebound, even if he's averaging, I don't know, what is it, 20, 25 a game or 23 a game. It doesn't matter. Like, if you're not filling out those other things, then you're not helping the team fully. And I think the Kings, more than anything else, they lost because they couldn't get an offensive rebound 3 straight possessions and allowed a dunk by the Timberwolves.
Yeah, that definitely was an issue. And I think it's telling that when I asked Coach Brown a few games ago, sort of, he really had talked to Keegan earlier in the year and shared with us that, when you're not shooting the ball well, what else do you do? And I kind of presented that same question from the perspective of Kevin. And I thought it was a little telling that he did kind of point towards more shooting things. He was like, he's a good mid-range shooter and he's a decent finisher around the rim. And there wasn't much after that. And I think he actually is a decent playmaker as well, just a sort of connecting piece. But Herter needs to find ways that when the shot isn't going down, and it was going down yesterday, I think he had 13 or more just in that third quarter alone. He was a very big reason they were able to kind of get back in that game because there's been, I think, 2 games in a row now where he just has this amazing stretch for half a quarter where he's just totally on fire. So he's been great in that aspect, but I think that the possessions where maybe he's not getting shots up, he's just got to find more ways to impact the game. And he's got to be a better player defensively. I think it's just doing the little things. Coach Brown talked about how hard it is to do the little things for 48 minutes, but that's what championship teams do. And obviously the Kings are on a championship team now, and maybe that's part of the reason. There's a handful, but that's part of it. And just finding more ways to impact the game outside of shooting, I think is an important thing that applies to a lot of these different players on Sacramento's roster.
Yeah. And I don't want to, again, we can single out players all we want. Like 2 games ago, the second OKC game, Herter had 20 points and 9 assists. So it's not like we're pointing out that he's just bad at these things all the time. Coming into today, we're like, I kind of set this up. We're going to discuss, why do you think it is that Herter and Monk can't have a good game together? Like, I know that they take turns, and Mike Brown really does ride the hot hand, and we're not seeing a lot of 3-guard sets with Kevin Herter at the small forward spot, which I think is very strange. Like, I thought that we would see a lot more of that, but we haven't. And it feels like either one of them is great or the other one is great. And like the last 3 games, Herter offensively has just been, spectacular. 20, the last 3 games, 20, 18, and 29. So again, he's averaging 22.3 points. He's shooting 65.8% from the field and 57.9% from 3. At the same time, in those 3 games, Malik Monk is this is not good. I don't even want to read these stats. Malik Monk in the last 3 games. So he had 45 points and then he had 12. And in the 12-point game he was 4 or 5 from 3. In the 3 games since those 2 games, 6.3 points, shooting 25% from the field, and 10% from 3 in 3 games. And I mean, it's a super small sample size, but it pairs up perfectly with the Kevin Herter sample size. Like, you look at him and you're like, okay, why are we doing this the entire season where one of you is good and the other one isn't, and then you guys switch roles all the time?
Yeah, I think Meg in the chat has a decent point. Like, she asked, is it a hot hand? They kind of just feed the guy who starts making shots. And I think that you see that a bit. I mean, obviously the offense is going to run through Fox and Sabonis. And I think that if one of these other guys is rolling, that you can kind of try to keep them involved. But I don't know why they can't exactly do it on the same night. I think they can, but they more so haven't. It's, to me, I think kind of just the nature of these players. I think it's part of the reason why Kevin Herter was obtainable. Obviously, Atlanta also had a little bit of a roster logjam and salary issues there, but Malik Monk was a 2-year, $19 million contract. Like, these aren't stars. They're offensive players who space the floor. And every once in a while, they're going to have nights where they're phenomenal offensively. But with the nature of being those type of players, you're going to have up and down nights. And I think it's kind of just the reality of how these players are, that sometimes they're going to be a bit up and down. But to more specifically your question, I genuinely have no clue why it doesn't happen on the same night. Best theory I have is kind of what Meg pointed out, that if one of these guys is going, that they're making sure that they are getting set up specifically, and therefore maybe the other guy is a little bit less involved in the offense.
Yeah, I'm going to guess too that if we look and we really dive into it, that we kind of have a similar situation with Keegan Murray and Harrison Barnes. Like maybe there's more crossover 20-point games for those three guys, for those two guys. But I think there are also a lot of games where we see that if Keegan is going, then Harrison Barnes kind of takes a step back. And if Harrison is going, there's a lot of times where Keegan kind of takes a step back. Actually, Harrison Barnes has been really good the last 3 games. I mean, he's averaging 20, 22 a game. It's funny. Everyone on this team feels like they can average 22 a game because number one, the Kings score that much. Number two, because you have to, because you can't put anyone away because you don't play any defense. So it does feel like, I didn't know that guy's averaged 20 something a game the last 3. But when you're putting up 130 points a night, like somebody's gonna have to score. Even like the Trey Day, like Trey Lyles, like man, he just like steps up and he has these huge moments in games. And we talked about it a little bit with how are you going to piece this roster together going forward? Is Trey part of that? And he's been so huge for the Kings this year. Like outside of their top 5 guys, I would say that Trey probably has more games where he impacts the winning, even than Davion and Malik. But in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe Malik has 1 or 2 more games than Trey, but you still run into this issue of like, how are you going to piece these things together after this? You still need a shot blocker. You still need, unless you shift Trey to the 5, and maybe that's how they do with some of this, but you still need those items that are on the list. And I don't know. What are your thoughts on Trey and how does he fit?
I think that Trey has become a pretty important member of this team, a lot more important than what I would have assumed coming into the year. And after what we saw during the post All-Star break or post trade deadline that he spent in Sacramento last year, which I do give a lot of credit to Mike Brown, I will say, and Trey Lyles, obviously. But I think that the pump fakes going away, him becoming a better rebounder, like those were specific things that Mike Brown challenged him on that I think have really helped his game. But it's to the point where like yesterday, we're sitting there with a couple of the media guys and we're talking about like, I really think Trey needs to be back next year. And he also has his defensive shortcomings. So if you can find a player who can still supply for you offensively, but maybe is a better defender, it's not like 1000% Trey needs to be here. If you can get an upgrade, I think that that's reasonable, but he's become an important piece. He was the best option at backup 5 last night, and that's been the case a couple times this year. They also did it the second time that these teams played in Minnesota. And coach mentioned specifically when it comes to Rudy Gobert, and Trey being out there as the 5, that if you want to feed Rudy Gobert and have him ISO post-ups, sure, we're fine with that. And then on the offensive end, Trey Lyles helps pull the rim protector Rudy Gobert, and that would fit other player archetypes as well on other various teams. It pulls him out the paint and really helps, obviously, Fox and Domas go to work in the paint and some of their split actions and things like that. So I think that Trey has become a really important part of this team as the 7th, 8th guy on this roster, because he's a great connector on offense. I think that he's a really good rebounder, and he doesn't necessarily pop off the page in a bad way to me defensively either.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking like how, like per 36, like Mike Brown is going to the starters a lot. So like your bench players, your Davion's averaging like 18 minutes, Monk's averaging like 22 minutes, and then Trey is averaging around 16 minutes a game. His per 36 minutes are almost identical to every other season of his career, like 16.8 and 8.4. So I go back to like his two stops last season, 18.4 points, 8.9 rebounds. Almost every stage of his career, it's kind of the same thing. He's steady. The one thing that Mike did bring up that I think he's really helped Trey with is the pump fakes. So this year, Trey's shooting 37.7% from three. He really is giving you that other, like, the big that can space the floor that the Kings need. And you could look at Trey, I guess, as a player archetype, but he's also like super soft spoken, super bright. Like his post game was it last night that we had Trey for post game? Oh yeah, yeah. Like he doesn't sugarcoat things. He's straightforward. He's honest. Like, and it's at times brutally. Like we were terrible, terrible defensively, and it's something that we're just getting worse at. And it's so for me, like I like having Trey Lyles around. I don't think you can get him back at $2.6 million per year like he is this year. I don't know why he signed a. I mean, I guess it's the dynamics of the NBA. There isn't that much money for guys that are around Trey's skill level, but you still would have thought he could have got more than like a 2 year, $5 million deal, which is what he's playing on. I don't think he's an $8 million a year player, but at today's NBA market, you would at least think a $4 to $5 million a year player. And just by watching him every night, and I was talking to John Dickinson, who covers the Warriors. I was talking to him last night. He's like, you know how much the Warriors could use a guy like that, a guy that just does everything well. He's not spectacular in any fashion, but he doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't cost you ball games. He knows how to rebound. He knows how to shoot the three. He knows how to pass. He knows how to do all these things. And he's not a me guy. He's not asking for it. He plays a little bit of physicality. He hits somebody every once in a while in the chest. I think he's a guy that I would like to see back next year, but we're gonna have to see what happens.
Yeah, the number I had kind of settled on because I was having this conversation with a couple of the media guys yesterday was like 215. I think that would be totally fine for me with Trey. It is a lot. Like I was more so talking the higher number that I'd be willing to offer. Like, and I think that Trey is sort of that type of value in the league. The salary cap's supposed to go up a bit. So I think that there is going to be an interesting conversation come postseason of the Trey Lyles conversation, a little bit of a Terrence Davis conversation, which Terrence Davis, by the way, has been pretty bad these last two games. Coach has given him opportunities early, and then if there's more than one defensive lapse within a couple possessions, it's like to the bench, and we probably won't see you again for the rest of the game. And that's what happened in both of these games. In the Timberwolves game, he played 6 minutes. He played 7 minutes in that game against the Clippers. Had a couple possessions where he kind of got cooked defensively, and that was the end of Terrence Davis. But it's going to eventually be some interesting conversations with some of these guys at the end of the bench.
Yeah, see, I'm looking at Trey. Like I know I think that number's high. I think you can get Trey. So the NBA is kind of weird this way. When a player decides, well, when they take less money, it's really hard for them to go back up in salary. So when a guy goes from being a 5 million or even say it's why a lot of players and a lot of agents don't want their players bought out at the deadline, right? Because if you get bought out at the deadline and you go sign a minimum deal to finish the year, it's really, really hard to become a player who gets a regular contract, a big contract again. Like you don't often see it. And so I think Trey's probably going to play at about the same exact money. His last year was a 2-year, $5 million deal. I think he's going to be biannual exception money, the 2-year, 4 point something. It might work out at, 4 point per year. It might be like a 2-year 8, a 2-year 9, and that's what he'll play for. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think everyone gets in the mode of overvaluing the players, and I'll bring up one player very specifically. Like Kings fans freaked out when Harry Giles didn't get his 2 point whatever $1 million contract. I think it was right at $3 million for his 4th year, right? And then everyone was, oh man, it would have been such a deal. He's clearly going to get $6 or $7 million a year. He got a league minimum deal. Willie Cauley-Stein, league minimum deal. He wanted to get paid. He got league minimum deal, or maybe a 2-year $6 million deal, something really, really low. Um, they're just when you're that in that range of player, when you are an 8 through 10 in a rotation, you just don't get paid. And so I don't know. I think it's a good conversation, but I would say the same thing about like what do you think Terrence Davis is going to get in free agency? 24 years old, 24, 25, like he's up and down.
Yeah, I'd
League
probably be
minimum.
more. Yeah, I'd pay Trey more than Terrence Davis at this point.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, still, I think he's a league minimum player, most likely. You know,
Yeah,
I don't know. I'll also like I could write a piece one day on how many players have left Sacramento and ever got paid, ever got even. I mean, this is for like historically, it's your last stop in the league for so many guys. I mean, I could go through a ton of guys who this was the last place they played, and certainly the last place they got paid any substantial money at all, and then they don't go on to have like make a bunch of money in other spots. So just kind of weird.
it's
Yeah,
different
and
now,
Brad,
James.
yeah, Brad, you bring up a good point here. Keon is going to take TD's spot. That's probably a good point. Like Keon Ellis is getting closer and closer and closer to ready. What is he shooting? I know you've got the tattoo, so I'll ask you the stat. What is he shooting from 3 point range on the season at the G League level?
42.9% on 4 a game. And I actually got to go down there the other day and talk to him and Bobby. And Bobby was saying he wants him to shoot 8 threes a game. And I'm going to be writing on that, and I'll have something on it tomorrow. But I do think that Keon's been playing really well. I think the big development for him recently has kind of been the playmaking. That was something that coming out of Alabama he was not great at. I forget which one was a little higher, but his assists and turnovers were totals during his time at Alabama were neck and neck with each other. But I think
Yeah,
he's developed as a playmaker, and obviously he has that sort of defensive disruption ability. But as much as I am optimistic or hopeful about Keon, I don't think that if you're going into next year betting on Keon Ellis, that's a great strategy.
I think next season Keon Ellis can be your fifth guard.
That's fine. Like a fifth. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I think he can
I
be your
agree.
fifth guard. He's a guy that can come in and give you minutes, especially if you have injuries and stuff. I don't think that they think. I think they're probably there with him. Maybe we're wrong, but like I don't hear. There's not a bunch of chatter about him. It's funny. I didn't expect this podcast in particular. And if you are, we'll just reset. If you are watching, thanks for joining us here on the live show on the King's Beat podcast. If you don't mind, give us a thumbs up. That would help us. And then subscribe to the channel if you get a chance. But I didn't expect this to like go into like a weird contract conversation. But even Bryce is bringing up the Harrison Barnes potential. Like what would you do for Harrison Barnes? And I've been very clear. Like I think Harrison Barnes is still a really good player. I think he's still he's got a lot of basketball in him, and he's also a player that really does like he has so many roles that people don't know about behind the scenes that I would be willing to go like 3 year 48 or 3 year 45, but have it be a declining scale contract. So a 3 year 48 would look like 17, 16, 15, or a 3 year 45, I'd go 16, 15, 14. Does that seem, do you think he'll get more than that?
I think that he could. The team that stood out to me all year for HB is Cleveland. I think that what got pointed out to me is one of the underrated aspects of their move for Donovan Mitchell is they actually cleared up cap space, and the 3 is the specific position that they need. And I also, when talking to Cleveland people, they always like to throw the joke that HB already helped them win 1 championship, so why not do
Ouch.
another? But I think that HB could get a little bit more than that, but I would be thrilled at that sort of contract. And James, you and I were having some conversations yesterday, and it got pointed out, and we've seen this, but to hear it is just echoed. It stands out the importance of the mix of personalities that they have on this team, and how good just that chemistry is. And Harrison Barnes, as a part of that, can't be understated. Mike Brown has talked about that endlessly, and so have all the players. Like, this is a guy that is the most veteran on this team when it comes to postseason experience, that is at least playing consistently. And I think that his sort of even keeled mindset and seemingly good communication is just another layer that I think is really important and people can overlook if they aren't paying attention to those close details. He's obviously still an impact player on the court, but there's a lot of off court value that comes with Harrison Barnes as well.
Yeah, and I think that there are going to be really good playoff teams that look at Harrison Barnes as like an option that could help them get over the top, and so that's where, like, can he go back to the Warriors? Probably not. The Warriors don't have any money, but there are other teams that he just makes a ton of sense for. And I'll also say this too: he's not just a good citizen and like a good teammate, but he's a guy that, like, if you get to the point where Keegan Murray is like really, really good and Keegan Murray is taking over and has become, sort of the guy outside of Fox and Sabonis, that Harrison Barnes won't have a huge problem with allowing that to be the case. Like, he's not going to be clinging to to 15 points a game because he has to score 15 a game or something. And I think there's also a point where if you were to find the other guy that the Kings are missing, that we keep talking about this mystical unicorn that the Kings can't seem to find, the 6'8", 6'9", defensive minded, shot blocking presence that maybe can rebound a little bit and hit the three ball a little bit and complement, this team and the roster and increase your defensive acumen. I don't think Harrison is a guy that, maybe not next year, but the year after, would he come off the bench? I think he would. I think he'd be a guy that, like, wouldn't, as long as he's getting his 26 to 30 minutes a game and he's prolonging his career, I don't think he'd have a problem being whatever you need him to be, especially since he kind of grew up with Andre Iguodala as one of those mentors and role players that he was around. And I could see him, I mean, he's clearly not the Iguodala type defender, but Iguodala is also not the offensive weapon that Harrison Barnes has been throughout his career. I could see him being a guy that, like, okay, I'm going to be here. I'm gonna usher in the next version of who this team is, and I'm gonna be here as whatever role that fits. As long as I'm playing and I'm part of what's happening, I don't think he's gonna be a problem. So, anyway, I that's just my opinion on him. Um,
I totally agree with you. And I think another aspect is just Keegan Murray. They're both Iowa guys and they seem to have a decent relationship there, but like they're very similar types of players. And I think Keegan getting to have Harrison as somebody that he can bounce things off of. Like you mentioned, if Keegan's playing great and HB needs to take a step back, I think he'd be willing to do that. I also think if Keegan goes through a slump, that Harrison would be one of the people that is in his ear, kind of making sure that he stays right mentally and telling him the right things to focus on. So I think that's another aspect of, like, you want Keegan Murray to become a Harrison Barnes.
yeah. I'm going to bring this up too. Michigan Wolverines. I'm not sure, who this is, but he's invested a lot in this community. And the reason I put this up there, I'm just going to tell you that, as far as like players who give back, there isn't any that are better than Harrison Barnes. He's given back so much to Ames, Iowa. It's crazy. Like, he grew up in the Boys and Girls Club. His mom, had him and his sister at the Boys and Girls Club all day long, every day, after school programs, everything else. Actually, their story is amazing. His mom had a business where she would basically get suits and dress wear for people who were looking for a job, and she would help them get dressed for job interviews, basically through a consignment store type deal. And just like they're great people, but also he goes to Dallas. He does the same exact thing in Dallas. Like, he gives back still in Dallas so heavily from his time there to the Boys and Girls Club, but also he has a program where there's an app for a savings account for children and low income areas, and he's basically teaching young kids in low income areas how to save and how to manage their money from like very young ages. He does that as well in Sacramento. And then his wife's family, his wife Brittany, they're from this area. They're from the Bay Area. and they have a ton of ties because of his Warriors ties, but also that's where she's from. She actually graduated from her grad school. She went to North Carolina, but finished grad school at Berkeley. And going into the pandemic, unfortunately for them, they were in the middle of opening a salon in Oakland. And I'm not sure whatever happened with that. Maybe it's thriving. I have no idea. I haven't checked in on that, but I'm assuming like during the pandemic stuff, it was pretty brutal. But they have a ton of ties here. So whether it's, I don't think Harrison Barnes is picking up and leaving his wife and little girl to go play in Cleveland. Now, would he like consider LA? Would he, a couple of teams there? Would he go back to the work? Like there are other options, but like at a certain point, like this guy's made a lot of money, and he's called the senator around or Congressman Barnes. He's a guy that like he's a smart dude who has made his money work for him out off the court, and his decisions are going to be about what is the best fit for him.
And
Again, I didn't expect this, right? To go into like a weird and contractual thing. What would you give up? What would be your price range?
well, real quick before I drop a
Okay.
number on you, I think that another guy that you hear a lot of great stories about when it comes to personality, obviously having an on-court production, but community work and stuff is Mike Conley. And you just saw the importance of having one of those type of guys and the importance of chemistry. I don't know that Kings fans necessarily forget what it's like to have a bad sort of vibe around your team and maybe guys wanting to do a little bit too much, but like, D'Angelo Russell is a better player than Mike Conley, but I guess I got told some crazy stories yesterday about D'Lo, but that trade is a lot to do with chemistry and getting a good leader and connector, not just on the court, but off around that team. And they've gone on this West Coast road trip and got 3 really big wins against the Clippers, Lakers, and now the Kings. So I think that's a good example of just how important all that type of stuff is. But when it comes to the number for HB, I think if you can get a declining deal, Ken Cantanella, especially, even though Ken's not around anymore, on HB, and even if you had to start it at 22 and it goes down to 18, like I don't know that I like am letting him walk. Like it's so hard to in these conversations to actually pick the number of like if it goes above X, I just letting him walk, because if HB leaves, what's your replacement? You know? So I don't know that I'm like that's not my initial offer or anything, but I think it's pretty close to 20 million over like a 3-year sort of thing, and ideally declining would be my number that is the total max, and after that you probably have to walk away.
Yeah, he makes 18.6 this season, and it's been a declining scale. His contract extension was declining scale, 4 years. I think it was 4 years, 85 million. 4 years, 84, 85 million. It was 1 million less than what Buddy Hield got. So whatever that is, and so basically that contract, it has gone down every single year, and I could see just the natural progression of it. Even if it's like 17.5, 16.5, 15.5, and you're paying him a 3 year 49 or something. I still think that that's reasonable for who he is, and we're talking about his 31, 32, and 33-year-old season. He's still going to be a very functional, solid NBA player at that point, and like you don't want to spend so much money that hampers other things that you can do. I'll bring this up too. Brett Huff, who is a friend of the show here, we were texting back and forth about something, and he brought up he had heard something about the potential for the new CBA to close one of the loopholes or to help out with one of the loopholes of the Kings situation with Domantas Sabonis, right? Where they're about to go into a summer where you would love to extend him like a massive, gigantic contract, but you can't because he's limited only to I think it's 125% of his salary in year one, something like that. So you can only go up to like $23 million or something. He's going to make so much money by opting out, or not opting out, by just waiting for his contract to expire And the difference between what he can get then and what he can get if you try to extend next summer is in the hundreds of millions. It's like outlandish. But there, there's been rumor. This is where I get it back to Brett. He had mentioned that he had heard rumor that there was the possibility that they will allow players like Sabonis to sign for up to 150% of their previous salary as a starting salary. And so that would actually, bump his contract, which is it's only like 18.6 million next season. Maybe it's a little bit more than that. Maybe it's 19. But like Sabonis doesn't make any money, and that's a great thing. That's a great problem to have when you have a player who is making less than their value. But when it comes to extending them, it becomes a huge problem because of all these salary cap issues. And so I was looking at, I'm just panning down really quick. So it's 19.4 for next season. So I think again, the most you can offer him is in the low 20s, and that's just not going to get it done. But if it went up to a full, 50% more, 150% of his cap number now. So if he's making 19, that's like you can go up another 9.5 million on that number, and that would put it at like what 29 million for a starting salary. Sabonis would at least listen because that would be 29 million in year one plus 8% raises every year. And then if the Kings have salary cap money this summer, which they do, they could actually add a couple of million to the first year's salary. So as opposed to him making 19.4 million next year, they could bump that up to say, I don't know, 24 million, which isn't even that much money. Like in NBA standards, if you have the cap space, you can bump up a player's salary. We just saw it with Miles Turner in Indiana, right? So if you go up to 24 million and then you sign his extension off of that and you have the ability to go to a full 150%, now you're talking about a starting salary in year one of a new contract extension at 36 million bucks. And that's something that I think Sabonis would listen to. So if you're doing a 5-year deal, it'd be a 5-year, like $211 million contract. And that's probably maybe even a little bit less than he's going to make. But with the salary cap projected to go up a ton, he might just say, "Hey, no, we're going to wait it out." But how many players have you seen blow out a knee or pop an Achilles and all that stuff? And like, if you could guarantee yourself and your family $211 million over the next 5 years, you'd probably listen.
Probably listen, but I will say, like, he's probably going to make all NBA, and then correct me if I'm wrong, he becomes super max eligible, right? Like, and I think
Yeah,
there's a notable difference at that point that might be hard to turn down. But of course, like you said,
yeah,
there's always injury concerns, and like that, those numbers you're presenting are hard to not at least have a conversation about.
yeah, yeah. I mean, he is probably going to be supermax eligible, which is your supermax means that you can make up to 30% of the salary of your team's salary cap. So if the salary cap goes up to 150 million, you're looking at like a starting salary of 45 million bucks. And then it goes up with the cap as opposed to some of the other deals. Yeah, it's a lot of money. A lot of money. Anyway, yeah. Uh, I just think it's interesting to talk about and to mull over now because we don't have to worry about it for like this season. It probably won't be something that's like the Kings would offer him an extension this summer without any question, but it would almost be disrespectful, and they know that, and they understand that he's likely going to have to become a free agent at the end of next season, and then get his contract then, just because of the NBA rules. Like the Kings would love to keep him around long term, and they intend to keep him around long term. It's something that you don't give up a potential star point guard in order to bring in a player like Sabonis and then let him walk after 2 years. That's not the point here. Anyway, I think it's good food for thought that we've kind of touched base on. We could talk about, since Sean isn't here and it always upsets him when he talks about it, we could talk about Nerlens Noel not signing with the Sacramento Kings.
Damn, that's the real reason Sean's not here. He was just so disappointed that Noel went somewhere else.
Oh yeah, yeah. He got a little bitter. He doesn't like talking Nerlens Noel. But yeah, that did happen. Nerlens has signed somewhere else. We've passed the deadline, so if you're going to be playoff eligible, you had to be on a roster. If you're a free agent, you had to be on a roster by March 1st. So like the Kings, you know, they're not gonna go out and bring someone else in at this point. At least not that it doesn't seem like they're going to. So like guys like Alex Len, Dellavedova will probably finish the season on the roster unless the team decides to make some move to get some young player that's up and coming that they like, and make a move that way, or convert one of their two ways to a roster player and sign someone else to a two-way contract to lock them in for next season, the year after that.
Question
All
for you.
right, I'm listening.
You guys didn't get De'Aaron in locker room, right? Because he was
No, but I did
really
get to.
holding that hand yesterday.
Yeah, we did not. We did not. He got banged on the wrist pretty hard. I saw that. We did not get him. He's sneaky, sneaky. So he came in while we were getting Kevin Huerter and grabbed his stuff and ran out the door before we could get him. I did, for those out there, I did run into Rasay in the hallway, and it got to meet Baby Rain. So he's a cute little dude, absolutely beautiful little guy. So I did get to meet the baby last night, which is, I love babies. Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah. So, do you have any factor caps for us today? I mean, it's only two of us, but still.
If you have anything to talk about, I can formulate some for half a sec.
Okay, that works. You formulate while if you're watching on the stream, give us a thumbs up. If you don't mind, subscribe to the channel. That would be amazing. Become a premium subscriber to the King's Beat. We're growing like crazy. Like, I started adding into my 6 quick things, like the link to the King's Beat. And I guess people just didn't realize I did the King's Beat. And they just thought I was a guy on Twitter who sat there and tweeted out 6 quick thoughts in post game. But like, thanks to all the new subscribers, because there's a ton of new subscribers to the King's Beat. But becomes premium subscriber. We are going to have a happy hour coming up. The schedule is really, really crappy for our typical happy hour day, which is Thursday. So I'm going to have to move it. There's a game almost every Thursday from here on. And so I'm working on that, and we'll figure that out very soon. Sydney Dean, we're going to get to the Ja Morant situation in the business of basketball. Also, Prize Picks, like, thanks to Prize Picks for jumping on board with the sponsorship to the King's Beat. We don't do it here on the YouTube channel, but we do on the audio file, and Prize Picks is pretty cool. I'm having a great time, and I'm really bad at it. Like, Prize Picks is fun.
Damn John Collins.
Damn you, John Collins. Shakes fist at John Collins. I mean, seriously, his projection was 10.5 points, and like, you finished with 3 points, John Collins. Like, what is wrong with you? Yeah, so I'm having a good time with the daily fantasy games. I haven't ever played daily fantasy before, and it's cool. Like, it's cool. So big shout out to Prize Picks for jumping on board with us here on the King's Beat. It's pretty cool. Victor says he's damn near addicted to it. I'll be honest, Victor. I thought about it right before the game last night. Ooh, I could do another, like, a 6 pick, like I could go for like 6 players and like hit their projections, go above or below. I don't know. I was intrigued by it. I didn't do it. I actually have to win one of these nights in order, like, or it's like, oh, this is a bad idea. All right, you got factor cap for us?
I do. So first one we'll start with is factor cap. Sacramento's defense will keep them out of the second round of the postseason.
Hmm.
So will they make it to round two?
I think it's a coin flip, and I think it depends on who they play. Um, I don't know. Like this team is fun, man. They're they're proving us wrong. Like you think, oh well, their offense is gonna have to be there in the playoffs. Like this is the best offense in the history of the NBA. Let that sink in. And it's not even close. A 118.5 offensive rating. Like it's not even close. Like this is by far the best offense the NBA has ever seen at this point. Like could they dip? Yeah, yeah, they could. But anyway, I'm gonna say cap. I think the Kings in the first round, like it doesn't exclude them. They can still make it to the second round. What about you?
It's a fact for me. I think they can make it to the second round, but I really am concerned that this level of defense is going to really come around to bite them. I guess I do think of those Atlanta teams that ironically also did have Kevin Herter, that they were able to get a bit further, but I think that this Western Conference is a lot more competitive in this first round than what the Eastern Conference was at that time. I'm pretty concerned about the defense, and I worry that the offense could take a bit of a hit come the postseason, just with how opposing teams are going to be scouting them. But as you said, it's legitimately the best offense of all time. So I still think they'll be able to keep up. I think it's going to be a competitive first round, but I'm pretty worried about making it to round two. Or I shouldn't say worried, because making it to the first round, having a competitive series and getting knocked is still an extremely successful season for this team, especially if you're going off what your expectations were coming into the season. But I think it's a fact. I think that this sort of defense is something that could end up getting you knocked out in round one.
Okay. That's interesting. I mean, I think it can be a combination too, because like, look, the offense still has to be this good in the playoffs for you to have a shot. And now you're taking a group of guys to a lot of who haven't been there. Many of them haven't been there, and you're going to expect them to hit pressure shots and pressure situations. And whether you go in and like, I think the attitude of the team, if they come in with like, we got nothing to lose and we're just here playing, having a good time and on house money, and we're going to ride the wave and try to light the beam as many times as possible. If that's 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, whatever it is, we're a-okay. If you have that mentality and you come out without all that pressure, that's one thing. But a lot of these guys haven't been there. So the offense, that's when shots come up short or they're off by a millisecond and they pop out of the rim. And, so yeah, I don't know. I think it could be the defense is not great and they lose because of defense. But I also think, you know, they're going to have to be this good offensively if they have any shot. And just because of the defensive woes. So,
Absolutely. And I don't know that, in my mind, they do go into the playoffs with a little bit of expectations and pressure, just kind of being that third seed. Like, I think there's going to be pressure to prove these other teams wrong that I think are rightfully circling the Kings as the matchup that they want to face. Like, if the Kings have a bad showing in the first round of the playoffs, it's going to be right back to some of the old lazy narratives, to be honest, that have surrounded the team for a while. And I think that they're better than that. I don't think that'll be the case, but I do think there's a decent bit of pressure on these guys. Maybe not the same as the other teams quite around them or anything. But I think a lot of people are thinking that this is just a regular season thing. And I guess I kind of fall into that until I'm proven otherwise. And hopefully I'm wrong. Second one I got for you, and this will lead us into our business of basketball, is that the Memphis Grizzlies will remain in the 2 seed, fact or cap. And to go through, Ja Morant has a 2-game suspension that could get longer. Steven Adams is still out. Dylan Brooks got suspended for 1 game, and anytime he gets another technical foul, he will be suspended for another game. And then Brandon Clark just had an Achilles injury and is out for the year. So factor cap, Mr. Ham, the Memphis Grizzlies, who are a game and a half above the Sacramento Kings, will remain in the 2 seed.
that's cap. That team is self-destructing. And like, first of all, shout out to Brandon Clark. Brandon Clark's parents live here. Well, his mom and stepdad, I believe, live here in the lake. And his younger brother. I don't know how that happened, but they do. Uh, and so whenever you go to a Kings Grizzlies game and you hear a bunch of people cheer every time Brandon Clark scores, it's because there's a group of people from the lake here that like 40 or 50 tickets that all come and like cheer for Brandon Clark. So really big bummer because man, he is a type of player that the Kings need desperately. That just mean, athletic, defensive minded, rebounding, shot blocking, power forward that just goes in there and thumps people. Even like Jared Vanderbilt, like kind of that, a little bit of that type of player. But I think the Kings could really use him. So I think that's a huge loss for them. And the fact that they still don't have Steven Adams back, and we don't know when Steven Adams is coming back, that's a huge loss too. They have not been good at all since Steven Adams left. And so yeah, they're in a bad situation. And the Dylan Brooks thing, it is what it is. Like I think he'll like figure it out that he can't just keep doing this and getting technicals all the time. That's not going to be like I don't think it'll be a huge deal down the stretch. Like what he might miss one more game, maybe two, if he does something really stupid where he gets multiple games with technicals. But we even saw this with DeMarcus Cousins. Once you hit the 16 and you get the 1 game suspension, you have to remember a 1 game suspension comes with, I think it's 130th of your salary, is what you lose for that. So I don't know what Dylan Brooks makes, but I can tell you that that probably cost him a couple of $100,000. And you don't just give away a couple of $100,000 multiple times in a season. So the jaw situation, though, I think we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that actually right now. The one thing I do want to look at is how much Dylan Brooks makes and how much that costs Dylan Brooks. Dylan Brooks makes 11.4 million. So I don't know what that breaks down to, but that's not a good thing. That's a lot of money to lose. And if I'm Dylan Brooks, I'm not getting any more technicals because I don't want to lose more money. Anyway, yeah, that's where I go with that.
I think I have to go Cap as well. I mean, we've seen the Grizzlies be good without Jaw in years prior. Like, I do think it's important to not overlook like Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson, some of the other guys on that team that I do think they have some decent depth that can fill in. But one of their biggest things was always chemistry. You were always seeing these post-game things where everybody's coming to the post-game interview and they're taking these great, like almost defensive player of the game chain type pictures and things like this. Like the chemistry was such a big thing for Memphis. And I can't help but think these storylines in this really, really tough week that they've had is going to affect them. So I'm going to say Cap as well. I don't think they stick in the 2. I also don't know that I'm necessarily saying that means the Kings are the team that go into the 2 spot, but it's definitely within the realm of possibility. Phoenix is looking really good right away, actually.
Yeah, Phoenix is looking good. Like if the Kings fall below Phoenix, I mean, number one, that sucks because that's your division championship. Yeah, so I think the Kings are going to do everything they can, but at this point, we looked at it. What are they? 4 games ahead of Phoenix in the loss column. I haven't.
They're
No, they're
3.
3. Yeah, they're 3, and the Warriors are 4 games back in the loss column, and the Warriors got Steph back today, and but again, the Warriors have to prove that they can win on the road. They're one of the worst road teams we've ever. They're 7-23 on the road. I mean, that's shocking. And when you look at again, like the Kings have 19 games remaining, right? That's what we're looking at. Yeah, 19 games. Some of these other teams have fewer. So after today, the Warriors have 17 games remaining. And if they somehow lose today and they drop 5 back in the loss column with only 17 games to play, that means they have to be 5 games better than the Kings in the final. That's a lot. And they have 1 game against each other, but still, that's really insurmountable. I'd say Minnesota at 6 games back in the loss column, I don't think they can catch the Kings. And
No.
they're down to 16 games. Yeah, so basically if they go 16-0, the Kings would have to go 10-6 to finish the season for them to be in. So start doing the math. If the Kings go, again, like, I don't know, let's say they go 11-8 to finish the season in their 19 games. Is that where we're at? So, like, in that situation, Minnesota could have 2 losses. They'd have to go 14-2. That's crazy.
Not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. Yeah. And so you can take Minnesota, you can take Dallas, you can take the Clippers, you can take Utah, New Orleans, put them all in the same exact bundle. They will not finish above the Kings. I think there are only 2 teams below them that can finish above the Kings, and that's the Suns and the Warriors. So every time the Warriors lose, it's like it should be a celebration for the Kings. Especially the Warriors are one of those teams that, after today, they're at 17 games left. They've got 2 less games than the Kings. They play 2 more games than the Kings, so they have 2 less games left. Yeah, so that's gonna be really tough. As far as Memphis, though, like, I think it's very possible they fall to the 3. And I think teams should be like that's the team you want to play because they're a hot mess right now. I mean, you probably want to play the Kings and as 1A and 1B is Memphis in the first round. And if somehow they both make it through and you're the 2-3 and you get to play Memphis in the first round, that will be one of the funnest matchups we'll see in a long, long time. That will be a good time. So, okay, let's get to the business of basketball.
What are you doing, John Morant?
What are you doing, John Morant? Like, I have so many issues with this. Like, first of all, like, the culture of that team has been in question all season. Like, there's no question the culture of that team has been in question. It started last year, but we're starting to see it become more and more and more of an issue where this is a team that's John at everybody. This is, like, no pun intended. This is a team that's like that's been causing sort of some rifts, like on the court, off the court, all that stuff. But all of a sudden, like, this has become a really, really bad situation for the NBA. And I don't know what the NBA is going to do here. The Grizzlies tried to get out in front of this situation. And in case you have no idea what I'm talking about, John Morant, they're in LA, right? Is that where they were?
They were somewhere on the West Coast, yeah.
Yeah, so John Morant went out to a strip club and went on Instagram. Is that what he was on? And started waving a gun around. They play.
It was either Denver or LA.
It was either Denver or LA. So there are some layers to this onion here, Brenden. The first layer is, where did the gun come from? Did he carry that gun on the team plane? Did he carry a gun on a plane and leave the state of the state of Tennessee, and take that gun somewhere else? Because that in itself is going to be a major issue and likely a crime. Like, what does the NBA do about that? The fact that he's out there waving a gun is a huge issue. The fact that the gun was like, it looked like someone's purse gun, that's a whole nother issue. Like, what are you doing, like, taking the gun out of your mom's purse and waving around like this little tiny thing? The fact that, like, he probably needed to be drug tested that night because that didn't look like a normal dude. Like, there's some crazy things going on here. And Brenden, I don't know, it's really, really hard to watch a young kid who's falling apart and people aren't stepping up and seeing that he's falling apart and trying to get him away from whatever element that's hurting him, or get him into some sort of help situation where he's actually, like, I would be worried about this situation and worried about it getting worse and worse.
Yeah, I just don't understand. Like, he's really risking so much. He just got his his signature shoe with Nike. They've been having those commercials. He's got this new logo. He's one of the up and coming stars in the NBA that was looked upon, I feel like, so positively, and just like such an entertaining player on the court. And then there's all this stuff this year. This combined with the Indiana situation earlier this year, where there's players on the Indiana bus saying that there's red dots they're seeing. It's just, it really seems to me like it's hanging out with the wrong people, and you just have so much at risk for Ja Morant here that I don't understand why you would jeopardize everything that you have going for you. And it's a bad situation for the entire league. He got suspended 2 games by the Grizzlies. We'll see if the NBA ends up suspending him as well. I'd imagine they will. Through some conversations yesterday, a lot of people were throwing out the idea of like 5 games, which seems like it should be longer in my mind, but that was what a lot of people were kind of thinking yesterday. It's really just, it really screams to me like hanging out with the wrong people, or trying to give off a certain impression. And for what reason? Like, there's so much that Ja Morant has going for him, and the way that the entire way that he's looked upon has changed over the course of a couple of weeks. I mean, really the one night even, and there's obviously other instances prior to this, but I never would have. It's just happened so fast how quick that people are going to look at Ja Morant differently, and it's on him. But it was shocking to me. I mean, what's the last sort of scenario like this in the NBA? Is the closest thing like Gilbert Arenas?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Like, there are situations like this with, okay, so the league, it's tough because teams are in a weird situation. I've been honest about this in the past. I had actually gone to the Kings multiple times in the Ben McLemore era about, like, I thought that he was in a situation that he wasn't capable to handle. And like, he had so many family members, so many hanger-ons, like, there at the arena on game nights. People who were family members that all of a sudden were on his payroll as quote unquote security. Like, why do you need security? You're at an NBA game, you're in Sacramento. Like, what exactly is happening? Like, everyone with their hands out, and Ben McLemore filling out 20 to 25 envelopes in every pregame that are stuffed with tickets that he's buying for people. So he would spend in pregame, mind you, like, we're watching this in the locker room. So people who don't know, they're for a 7 o'clock start. We have one coach. We have the home coach at 5:15, the visiting coach at 5:30, and then from 5:45 to 6:15, like leading up to the game, 45 minutes before the game, we're allowed in the locker room. I'm walking in the locker room at 5:45, and Ben McLemore is going around asking all of his teammates for free tickets to the game that night, that game. And then once he ran out of tickets for his teammates to buy, that his teammates were giving to him, because every player is allotted a certain amount of tickets for a game, he would have to give his credit card to a locker room attendant, who would have to then run over to the box office and buy a stack of tickets to fill those envelopes. But it's on the player to fill it all out. So you got Ben McLemore in pregame filling out ticket envelopes with names of who the tickets are going to. And then he's got, but we're talking every game, 15, 20, 25 different envelopes. So he's doing all of this while he's supposed to be prepping for a game, mentally preparing for a game. The Kings right now at 6 o'clock, they have chapel. So a lot of guys come in, and then they go to chapel, which is in another room in the building. And they, have, they go over scripture, they pray, and they get ready for the game in a different way. Ben McLemore was filling out tickets. And so, like, he's probably the worst example in Sacramento that I've seen of people getting distracted. Although, like, the stories with Tyreek Evans were extreme as well. and his brothers having to come in and clear out riffraff again and again and again, and take credit cards and take car keys from people that somehow had talked Tyreek into getting leases or buying Mercedes for them as well, and like literally having to take 5 cars back that were bought under his name. Like these things happen, but teams are limited in what they can do to step in and like help a player. In this situation, that guy's not going anywhere without team security at all. He's not going anywhere. Like from here on out until he figures his stuff out, he needs a team employed or NBA employed like babysitter, because this thing can get worse. It can fully get worse. And that's what, like, this is a tale that could get really dark. And it already is. We're seeing it. But we're also seeing him and like his group of guys, that the laser pointer thing, what that Brenden alluded to, like those stories. We're friends with Sam Amick. He sits by us at almost every Kings game. He's local. He's not writing a story based on like an account of this off of one person's account. That story's legit. So whatever John Morant wants to say about that story's fake, no, that story happened. Like Sam is too good of a reporter to put a story like that out there where, first of all, his group of friends got in a fight with players from Indiana, security from Indiana, staffers from Indiana, and then went and got in a car and they drove by really slow, rolled the windows down, and all of a sudden people have laser pointers on their shirt and they thought it was guns in the car, right? So that's the other story that we're talking about. Like these situations are bad, and we're watching like his dad, who looks like Usher for some reason, sitting courtside at games and getting in fights with Shannon Sharp or whoever. Like they're living the lifestyle. That's called the NBA lifestyle, and they have bought their own like media. Like they're so far into this thinking that they're untouchable, and that's where the league needs to step in. 5 games to me, that's not enough.
There's also on the 1st of March, he was accused of punching a 17-year-old a dozen times and flashing a gun at him in a pickup basketball game. Like,
why is he playing a pickup basketball game in a pickup basketball? Number one. Number two, why are you punching? I read he got disrespected by a 17-year-old, and this is what happens. Like that again. NBA security needs to be all over this like the whole time, and it's because he needs help. Like something's gone wrong here, and like you have to step in and actually try to get him through this segment of his life and not his basketball career. And that's what needs to be like really, really looked at. This is about someone's life, not a basketball career. And that's what I've seen affected so many times, is the life is getting like, they can't handle what's happening in the life, let alone what's on the court. Like when he steps on the court, sure, he's really good. But like, man, this thing has the potential to spin out and get darker and darker, and for this to end up in some sort of weird tragedy. And like, you don't want that to happen. You don't want it for the league. You don't want it for the Memphis Grizzlies, but realistically, you don't want it for a young man who's very gifted and has all the talent in the world, but is clearly he's lost his way. And I don't want to say it's like the people he's hanging out with or anything. He has lost his way. He's responsible for his own actions, in my opinion. And that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing a kid who's making decisions that are not good at all.
Yeah. And hopefully this is a wake-up call and things turn around from here, and he can clean up whatever he feels he needs to clean up and get whatever help he may feel he needs. But hopefully we're looking back at the end of his career and just like, oh, remember that time that happened and everything was good after? Hopefully.
Yeah, and I mean, like also I'll bring up like Lorenzen Wright played for the Memphis Grizzlies early in his career. He ended up playing in Sacramento late in his career. Like ended up being shot and killed and left in a ditch. Like like these things happen. Like this world that they're in, there are a lot of people coming at you because you got a bunch of money. And so every time he got a signature shoe, how long do you think it takes someone to Google and figure out how much his Nike contract's worth? You just signed up with Powerade. How long do you think it takes for someone to figure out how much you got for that? And how much you think, like, we can sit here and tell you how much money he makes for his contract. And we know that, like, if he's on his second contract, he's going to be making De'Aaron Fox money plus. These are things that we actually can track. He's a target. And like, but he needs to not be, feed into it. And so, yeah, it's weird. And again, like Tyler Griner brings up, there's no reason he can't play a pickup game at his house for youth of the area. In the middle of an NBA season, you probably shouldn't be playing a pickup basketball game. Like, what if you roll your ankle? I mean, like, you're $1 million, you're an asset for an organization, and it's bad stuff. So anyway, yeah, I hope it works out for him. I hope he needs to. I hope he gets help. I hope that the Grizzlies are able to step in, or whoever's able to step in. It can be a teammate, it can be like someone within the organization, whatever it is. But there are limitations on what you can do to help somebody, and hopefully that they have the right person to reach him and touch him in the right way. So he figures out that he's gone astray. And, this isn't him being persecuted for something, that this is something that, you read the press release from him and it's like, okay, well, that's fine. But do you really believe that? Because I can also tell you that I guarantee you he didn't write that press release. So,
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
these are things. Yeah. Melissa said, did you like how the NBA is handling this? I don't know, what has the NBA done so far? Like, the NBA typically, they allow teams to handle some of this stuff. Even like we brought this up because we're dealing with the whole Rashawn Holmes situation. Like, we can get into that whole mess if we want to as well. The Rashawn Holmes situation where he's now suing the Sacramento Bee and I think a couple of writers specifically. Those are situations where the team, if he's convicted of something, the team has the first rights to like put some sort of suspension in place. When Darren Collison pled guilty to misdemeanor, domestic violence charge, the Sacramento Kings suspended him 8 games. It was not the NBA who suspended him 8 games. Like, these are things that, and then the NBA like will review and say, okay, that's enough or that's not enough, and they can step in and bump it up. Like, something dramatic has to happen here because this is like an entire season of nonsense. Yeah, it's really, really strange. So, okay, hey man, I think we're gonna wrap this thing up. Like, to my 2 cents, just for so it's out there. On the Rashawn Holmes thing, I think we might have covered this a little bit last pod, but I don't think so. The entire situation was bad from the beginning, as far as the way it was covered, and I said that on the original pod. I don't, I'm not going to profess to know what happens behind closed doors in other people's lives. Whether there are things that happen there between a husband and wife and a child that should not have happened or whatever. All I can tell you is that when it was reported, the way it was reported was not good from the beginning. It was one-sided. It was an opinion piece wrapped up in a news breaking story, that the news breaking story that was part of the opinion piece for some reason lacked any sort of support from the documents that were in place. There was no quoting of the court documents in Rashawn Holmes' custody battle case. That the Sacramento Bee ran with that story, which was always the biggest red flag for me. If you have this story and no one else that he's being accused of domestic violence, then you better put the quotes from the actual complaint into the story. So we're not just taking your understanding of the story, like your understanding of what happened at face value, because it's now an opinion piece. And so again, that's why you don't break news and write an opinion piece together, because there's like some very specific semantics here that you have to cover when you're writing a news breaking piece versus when you're writing opinion. And all of it was funky. And they didn't even bring up the Darren Collison situation, which was one of my other issues. They acted like the Kings were, part of the problem here, that they have a long history of not stepping up and doing anything about domestic violence, and that's just not the case. They actually did in the Darren Collison situation, and that was omitted from the original opinion slash news breaking piece. So some weird stuff that was there. So I hope everything works out for Rashawn Holmes and his family. And there's a little boy here that, is really the one who is going to pay the price for all of this. And I hope that they're able to figure it out. But again, very, very weird situation from the beginning and very unprofessional in my opinion. And it's something I said at the same time, like
Yeah.
is what it is.
Yeah, agreed.
Brenden,
We
yeah,
talked about it when it happened. I guess just quickly, I pretty much echo what you're saying. I think that it was poor reporting at the time, and when that initially comes out that Rashawn is doing this, it's not the most surprising thing to me. I understand where he's coming from with doing that, and just to echo what you said at the end, like definitely one of my first thoughts is just goes to their son that's kind of in the middle of all of this, and hope that it can get settled for the sake of Rashawn, the parents, and their little one as well, and get everything worked out there, because obviously not the best situation for a family dynamic there.
yeah, it's not the best situation. I'll add one last thing too. When Rashawn uh, actually gained custody of his son, and then his former wife was supposed to turn the son over and absconded with the child and went to Georgia and took the son to court again and tried to get custody and forum shop. And then they took Rashawn's son and held him in custody and called Rashawn and had him come and pick up his son in Georgia. Uh, all of those court documents were made available to the Sacramento Bee, and they sat on the story for at least 3 days, but more like 4 or 5. And then I got the actual court documents and like wrote a news breaking story on it, not an opinion piece, because I don't know all the facts and I haven't interviewed all the people, but I'm certainly not diving into that. I cover basketball. I can write a news writing piece about it. And they sat on that aspect of it for days before I broke the news on that. And that was just another element of, what are you doing? Like, you now have the actual court documents that say there is no proof of anything. It's in the court documents. She has no cell phone pictures of whatever there was supposed to be as far as the child abuse. There was no threatening text messages. She couldn't show those in court. None of it. So it became like this really, really strange situation, but also where like the follow up wasn't done after the fact, and when it was shown in court that Rashawn had been given custody of his son and all that stuff. That story was sat on as well. So,
And I'll also just add, like, while there's obviously people at the Bee that mishandled it, that doesn't mean every single person at the Bee was part of this. Like
very
Jason
true.
Anderson and Chris Biederman were not part of this in any sort of way. And I just think that's a important thing for people to know.
Yeah, and Jim Patrick, who was a sports editor at the time, they weren't part of it.
Right.
This was something that was done outside of the scope of the sports department. Yeah, just kind of a weird situation, but I hate covering those things, but it's part of the job. We've had quite a few DUIs to cover. We've had this is the second or third potential domestic violence situation that we've had here in Sacramento that we've had to cover, and maybe even fourth, if I'm going back, maybe even fifth. That has been part of like what's happened here in my 13 years covering this team, and it's just part of the job. So, okay, Brenden, let's finish on a different note. Before we'll make this our final thoughts, I guess. If you have any final thoughts to add afterwards, you're more than welcome. This is your second full season covering the team. You saw last year, you saw the worst of how things can go wrong and how bad things can get. And you sat there quietly while we all knew that Luke Walton was likely giving his last press conference. You went through a coaching change. You went through a team that gave up and started giving up 140 points tonight. Just how much different is this experience for you? Because it's way different for me, but even though, I've been doing this for a long time, it's still way different. But this year for you, how is this different for you as a young reporter?
It's very different. I mean, it almost feels like I want to call this one actually year one, but I guess that's not fair because, I mean, last year was just a learning process from my individual standpoint the entire time. Like, just even figuring out the way to um, kind of approach different questions, maybe not telling coaches that they're hiding players, but different ways to indirectly ask things and things like that. Like, this year has been totally different. I mean, covering winning basketball is also an entirely different experience. A lot of different personalities on these teams, and just getting to know all of these players a little bit better, and kind of getting a feel for when maybe is and isn't the time to ask certain things. Coach Brown has been my favorite person in the world to talk to. He's always a person that I most look forward to speaking with. Yesterday, he had a funny moment in post game with Tony, and Tony was kind of asking about skip passes. I don't think that was initially his question, but that's what ended up coming up. And Coach turned over his box score and took out a pen and drew out some X's and O's explaining to Tony what a skip pass is. And like, that is a great example to me of Mike Brown. Like, and it's not in a condescending tone or anything. It is legitimately trying to be as transparent as possible. And I just really appreciate the honesty of Coach Brown from what we've seen. And I've had a great time in this year. There's times it's maybe a little bit overwhelming, but I certainly can't complain.
Yeah, it's fun to sit and watch good basketball, winning
It is.
basketball. It really is. It is really a lot of fun.
Also,
And
Golden
you,
One is like the loudest place I've ever been at in my life.
I love it. Brenden, you're getting to experience it. Like, I was lucky enough to go to the 95-96 playoffs, and plenty of other playoffs during the 1998 to 2006 run. Arco Arena still is a louder building, but it's coming. You can feel what's happening at Golden One Center, and the crowd getting bigger and bigger and noisier and noisier. And yeah, just so you know, Brennan, they talk about the playoff level. There's another level the fans will get in the playoffs, and it is a blast. They're like going to playoff games. There were a time where you really needed earplugs because you're walking out of the building and you can't hear anything afterwards. I mean, it's like deafening. So yeah, you're gonna have a good time with this, man. I'm enjoying it. It's nothing that I've ever covered for sure. I've never had we're 2 wins away from my high of 19 wins. I mean 39 wins. 39 wins. We're 2 wins away from that, and there's 19 games left in the season. So I mean, this team has a potential to win 50. That's 50 is still on the table. So yeah, it's been a great season to cover, and I'm glad you don't just have to get beaten down like Sean and I have over the last. I mean, it's good. You're getting to see like the fun side that actually covering basketball should be. And I've gotten that from covering the Warriors playoff runs the last couple of years. Or for a long time I covered Warriors playoff runs. It's definitely something that's different, and you kind of get to see the highs and the lows, as opposed to just the lows, which we've kind of had to deal with here in Sacramento.
There were definitely games last year where they would just get their ass totally kicked. And I would be there sitting with you like, I don't know what to ask today.
It's okay. You don't have to ask anything. That's what I would tell you
Right.
every time. You don't have to ask anything. We got you. Sean and I and Jason Anderson, we can, whether it's tactfully or not, we can ask the questions that have to be asked in those situations. Yeah, it's weird, but so it's good to see it come full circle, and I hope that it continues this way. And not only that, but that this isn't a one-off, and that we get to see this for a couple of years. That would be fun. All right, man. Do you have any final thoughts?
I don't know how this happened, but yesterday I ended up re-listening to Mike Brown's introductory press conference and kind of reflecting back. And first of all, I remember leaving that presser and everybody being extremely impressed with Mike Brown. But just to hear like the three things that he specifically laid out that would lead to a good culture that he was going to try to implement, and those being a vertical and horizontal alignment of trust, a set of values that are led and upheld by the leaders, and an embracement of your role. Like reflecting back now, I know we still like if he's talking about long sustaining success, that still is TBD, and this is just the ideal beginning of that. But he's done exactly everything that he said he wanted to. So credit to Mike Brown.
Isn't it interesting to see somebody who doesn't have to come up with something new at the end? He laid out his staples at the beginning of the year, and he's forced his team to live up to those, and his team has lived up to those, and now he can still talk about the same things. You know, his basic tenets. The only thing that is it's killing Mike Brown, just so people know, it's killing him how bad they are defensively. Like on Friday night, there was no defensive player of the game, and that's like none of you deserve it. Damn you.
I felt bad because I chuckled a little when he said nobody won it, but he was dead serious.
Oh, he was pissed. He's pissed, and I don't blame him for being pissed. He has no idea how to put this thing in perspective. Yeah, bad. You're bad defensively. That's all I can say. Yeah, and it's just something that it's not him, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. So, yeah, maybe I think we're going to see Kessler Edwards quite a bit here in the final 19 games. Then again, we could never see him again. We have no idea. So, awesome. Okay, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Kings Beat podcast. If you're still watching, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the Kings Beat. Go to thekingsbeat.com. Become a premium subscriber to get access to everything that we do here and support the cause here. Outside of that, we'll be back this week. Probably have a podcast on Tuesday. The reason why we're doing a podcast on Sunday is because we had that weird Tuesday, and then they had Wednesday, Thursday, Friday off. And we did one podcast. Oh, no. They had Wednesday and Thursday off. So we had done a podcast, and then they had back-to-backs on Friday, Saturday, which makes it tough. So that's why we're doing it today. We'll be back on Tuesday. They play the Pelicans tomorrow. And that should be a very exciting and big game for this Sacramento Kings team. Yeah, thanks for joining us on this journey. So for Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast, I am James Ham, Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. Thanks for joining us on this live show. See you in a couple of days. Sean will be back. Be good.